the classic manual on the art of living, written in a style of gem-like lucidity, radiant with humor and grace, and large-heartedness and deep wisdom, one of the wonders of the world. People usually think of Lao Tzu as a hermit, a dropout from society, dwelling serenely in some mountain hut, unvisited except perhaps by the occasional traveler arriving from a 60s joke to ask, what is the meaning of life? But it's clear from his teachings that he deeply cared about society, if society means the welfare of one's fellow human beings. His book is, among other things, a treatise on the art of government, whether of a country or of a child. The misperception may arise from his insistence on wei wu wei, literally, doing, not doing, which has been seen as passivity. Nothing could be further from the truth. A good athlete can enter a state of body awareness in which the right stroke or the right movement happens by itself, effortlessly, without any interference of the conscious will. This is a paradigm for non-action, the purest and most effective form of action. The game plays the game. The poem writes the poem. We can't tell the dancer from the dance. Less and less do you need to force things, until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. Nothing is done because the doer has wholeheartedly vanished into the deed. The fuel has been completely transformed into flame. This nothing is in fact everything. It happens when we trust the intelligence of the universe, in the same way that an athlete or a dancer trusts the superior intelligence of the body. Hence Lao Tzu's emphasis on softness. Softness means the opposite of rigidity, and is synonymous with suppleness, adaptability, endurance. Anyone who has seen a Tai Chi or Aikido master doing not doing will know how powerful this softness is. Lao Tzu's central figure is a man or woman whose life is in perfect harmony with the way things are. This is not an idea, it is a reality. I have seen it. The master has mastered nature, not in the sense of conquering it, but of becoming it. In surrendering to the Tao, in giving up all concepts, judgments, and desires, her mind has grown naturally compassionate. She finds, deep in her own experience, the central truths of the art of living, which are paradoxical only on the surface. That the more truly solitary we are, the more compassionate we can be. The more we let go of what we love, the more present our love becomes. The clearer our insight into what is beyond good and evil, the more we can embody the good. Until finally she is able to say, in all humility, I am the Tao, the truth, the life. The teaching of the Tao Te Ching is moral in the deepest sense, unencumbered by any concept of sin. The master doesn't see evil as a force to resist, but simply as an opaqueness, a state of self-absorption, which is in disharmony with the universal process, so that, as with a dirty window, the light can't shine through. This freedom from moral categories allows him his great compassion for the wicked and the selfish. Thus the master is available to all people and doesn't reject anyone. He is ready to use all situations and doesn't waste anything. This is called embodying the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? If you don't understand this, you will get lost, however intelligent you are. It is the great secret. The listener will notice that in the many passages where Lao Tzu describes the master, I've used the pronoun she at least as often as he. The Chinese language doesn't make this kind of distinction. In English, we have to choose. But since we are all potentially the master, since the master is, essentially, us, I felt it would be untrue to present a male archetype, as other versions have, ironically, done. Ironically, because of all the great world religions, the teaching of Lao Tzu is by far the most female. Of course,
Greetings, fellow seekers of truth and wisdom. I'm inviting you to embark on a journey into the heart of Taoist philosophy. As an uncarved block holds the potential for all things, so too does the Tao Te Ching, a timeless text that reveals the mysteries of existence in the simplest yet profoundest ways. Today, I invite you to join me in exploring the essence of this ancient wisdom, and together, we shall learn the art of living in harmony with nature and ourselves. In the following reading, we will traverse the poetic words of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, delving into its teachings on self-reflection, balance, and unity with the universe. Contemplate these ancient concepts and allow yourself to be fully present as we journey through this sacred text and open our minds to its transformative knowledge. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations, yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. When people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Being and non-being create each other. Difficult and easy support each other. Long and short define each other. High and low depend on each other. Before and after follow each other. Therefore, the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. That is why it lasts forever. If you overesteem great men, people become powerless. If you overvalue possessions, people begin to steal. The master leads by emptying people's minds and filling their cores, by weakening their ambition and toughening their resolve. He helps people lose everything they know, everything they desire, and creates confusion in those who think that they know. Practice not doing, and everything will fall into place. The Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It is like the eternal void, filled with infinite possibility. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than God. The Tao doesn't take sides. It gives birth to both good and evil. The master doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. The Tao is like a bellows. It is empty, yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. Hold on to the center. The Tao is called the Great Mother. Empty, yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want. The Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born. Thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself. Thus it is present for all beings. The master stays behind. That is why she is ahead. She is detached from all things. That is why she is one with them. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly fulfilled. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you. Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. Can you coax your mind from its wandering and keep to the original oneness? Can you let your body become supple as a newborn child? Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? Can you love people and lead them without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control. This is the supreme virtue. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center hole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. Colors blind the eye, sounds deafen the ear, flavors numb the taste, thoughts weaken the mind, desires wither the heart. The master observes the world but trusts his inner vision. He allows things to come and go. His heart is open as the sky. Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. What does it mean that success is as dangerous as failure? Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. What does it mean? That hope is as hollow as fear. Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? See the world as yourself. Have faith in the way things are. Love the world as yourself. Then you can care for all things. Look, and it can't be seen. Listen, and it can't be heard. Reach, and it can't be grasped. Above, it isn't bright. Below, it isn't dark. Seamless, unnameable, it returns to the realm of nothing. Form that includes all forms, image without an image, subtle, beyond all conception. Approach it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. You can't know it, but you can be it, at ease in your own life. Just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced-over stream, alert as a warrior in enemy territory, courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment. Not seeking, not expecting. She is present and can welcome all things. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you, and when death comes, you are ready. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. Next, one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk. He acts. When his work is done, the people say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves." When the great Tao is forgotten, goodness and piety appear. When the body's intelligence declines, cleverness and knowledge step forth. When there is no peace in the family, filial piety begins. When the country falls into chaos, patriotism is born. Throw away holiness and wisdom, and people will be 100 times happier. Throw away morality and justice, and people will do the right thing. Throw away industry and profit, and there won't be any thieves. If these three aren't enough, just stay at the center of the circle and let all things take their course. Stop thinking and end your problems. What difference between yes and no? What difference between success and failure? Must you value what others value? Avoid what others avoid? How ridiculous. Other people are excited, as though they were at a parade. I alone don't care. I alone am expression, like an infant before it can smile. Other people have what they need. I alone possess nothing. I alone drift about, like someone without a home. I'm like an idiot. My mind is so empty. Other people are bright. I alone am dark. Other people are sharper. I alone am dull. Other people have a purpose. I alone don't know. I drift like a wave on the ocean. I blow as aimless as the wind. I am different from ordinary people. I drink from the Great Mother's breasts. The Master keeps her mind always at one with the Tao. That is what gives her her radiance. The Tao is ungraspable. How can her mind be at one with it? Because she doesn't cling to ideas. The Tao is dark and unfathomable. How can it make her radiant? Because she lets it. Since before time and space were, the Tao is. It is beyond is and is not. How do I know this is true? I look inside myself and see. The Master, by residing in the Tao, sets an example for all beings. Because he doesn't display himself, people can see his light. Because he has nothing to prove, people can trust his words. Because he doesn't know who he is, people recognize themselves in him. Because he has no goal in mind, everything he does succeeds. When the ancient masters said, if you want to be given everything, give everything up, they weren't using empty phrases. Only in being lived by the Tao can you be truly yourself. Express yourself completely, then keep quiet. Be like the forces of nature. When it blows, there is only wind. When it rains, there is only rain. When the clouds pass, the sun shines through. If you open yourself to the Tao, you are at one with the Tao, and you can embody it completely. If you open yourself to insight, you are at one with insight, and you can use it completely. If you open yourself to loss, you are at one with loss, and you can accept it completely. Open yourself to the Tao, then trust your natural responses, and everything will fall into place. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. He who rushes ahead doesn't go far. He who tries to shine dims his own light. He who defines himself can't know who he really is. He who has power over others can't empower himself. He who clings to his work will create nothing that endures. If you want to accord with the Tao, just do your job, then let go. There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. It flows through all things, inside and outside, and returns to the origin of all things. The Tao is great, the universe is great, earth is great, man is great. These are the four great powers. Man follows the earth. Earth follows the universe. The universe follows the Tao. The Tao follows only itself. The heavy is the root of the light. The unmoved is the source of all movement. Thus the Master travels all day without leaving home. However splendid the views, she stays serenely in herself. Why should the lord of the country flit about like a fool? If you let yourself be blown to and fro, you lose touch with your root. If you let restlessness move you, you lose touch with who you are. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving. A good artist lets his intuition lead him wherever it wants. A good scientist has freed himself of concepts and keeps his mind open to what is. Thus the Master is available to all people and doesn't reject anyone. He's ready to use all situations and doesn't waste anything. This is called embodying the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? If you don't understand this, you will get lost, however intelligent you are. It is the great secret. Know the male, yet keep to the female. Receive the world in your arms. If you receive the world, the Tao will never leave you, and you will be like a little child. Know the white, yet keep to the black. Be a pattern for the world. If you are a pattern for the world, the Tao will be strong inside you, and there will be nothing you can't do. Know the personal, yet keep to the impersonal. Accept the world as it is. If you accept the world, the Tao will be luminous inside you, and you will return to your primal self. The world is formed from the void, like utensils from a block of wood. The Master knows the utensils, yet keeps to the block. Thus she can use all things. Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. There's a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. The Master sees things as they are, without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way, and resides at the center of the circle. Whoever relies on the Tao in governing men doesn't try to force issues or defeat enemies by force of arms. For every force, there is a counterforce. Violence even well-intentioned, always rebounds upon oneself. The master does his job and then stops. He understands that the universe is forever out of control, and that trying to dominate events goes against the current of the Tao. Because he believes in himself, he doesn't try to convince others. Because he is content with himself, he doesn't need others' approval. Because he accepts himself, the whole world accepts him. Weapons are the tools of violence. All decent men detest them. Weapons are the tools of fear. A decent man will avoid them except in the direst necessity, and if compelled, will use them only with the utmost restraint. Peace is his highest value. If the peace has been shattered, how can he be content? His enemies are not demons, but human beings like himself. He doesn't wish them personal harm, nor does he rejoice in victory. How could he rejoice in victory and delight in the slaughter of men? He enters a battle gravely, with sorrow and with great compassion, as if he were attending a funeral. The Tao can't be perceived. Smaller than an electron, it contains uncountable galaxies. If powerful men and women could remain centered in the Tao, all things would be in harmony. The world would become a paradise. All people would be at peace, and the law would be written in their hearts. When you have names and forms, know that they are provisional. When you have institutions, know where their functions should end. Knowing when to stop, you can avoid any danger. All things end in the Tao as rivers flow into the sea. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. The great Tao flows everywhere. All things are born from it, yet it doesn't create them. It pours itself into its work, yet it makes no claim. It nourishes infinite worlds, yet it doesn't hold on to them. Since it is merged with all things and hidden in their hearts, it can be called humble. Since all things vanish into it and it alone endures, it can be called great. It isn't aware of its greatness. Thus, it is truly great. She who is centered in the Tao can go where she wishes without danger. She perceives the universal harmony, even amid great pain, because she has found peace in her heart. Music or the smell of good cooking may make people stop and enjoy. But words that point to the Tao seem monotonous and without flavor. When you look for it, there is nothing to see. When you listen for it, there is nothing to hear. When you use it, it is inexhaustible. If you want to shrink something, you must first allow it to expand. If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. If you want to take something, you must first allow it to be given. This is called the subtle perception of the way things are. The soft overcomes the hard. The slow overcomes the fast. Let your working remain a mystery to show people the results. The Tao never does anything, yet through it all things are done. If powerful men and women could center themselves in it, the whole world would be transformed by itself, in its natural rhythms. People would be content with their simple, everyday lives, in harmony and free of desire. When there is no desire, all things are at peace. The master doesn't try to be powerful. Thus he is truly powerful. The ordinary man keeps reaching for power. Thus he never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more are left to be done. The kind man does something, yet something remains undone. The just man does something and leaves many things to be done. The moral man does something, and when no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves and uses force. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. Therefore, the master concerns himself with the depths and not the surface, with the fruit and not the flower. He has no will of his own. He dwells in reality and lets all illusions go. In harmony with the Tao, the sky is clear and spacious. The earth is solid and full. All creature flourish together, content with the way they are, endlessly repeating themselves, endlessly renewed. When man interferes with the Tao, the sky becomes filthy, the earth becomes depleted, the equilibrium crumbles, creatures become extinct. The master views the parts with compassion because he understands the whole. His constant practice is humility. He doesn't glitter like a jewel, but lets himself be shaped by the Tao, as rugged and common as stone. Return is the movement of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. All things are born of being. Being is born of non-being. When a superior man hears of the Tao, he immediately begins to embody it. When an average man hears of the Tao, he half believes it, half doubts it. When a foolish man hears of the Tao, he laughs out loud. If he didn't laugh, it wouldn't be the Tao. Thus it is said, the path into the light seems dark, the path forward seems to go back. The direct path seems long, true power seems weak, true purity seems tarnished, true steadfastness seems changeable, true clarity seems obscure, the greatest art seems unsophisticated, the greatest love seems indifferent, the greatest wisdom seems childish. The Tao is nowhere to be found, yet it nourishes and completes all things. The Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, three gives birth to all things. All things have their backs to the female and stand facing the male. When male and female combine, all things achieve harmony. Ordinary men hate solitude, but the master makes use of it, embracing his aloneness, realizing he is one with the whole universe. The gentlest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world. That which has no substance enters where there is no space. This shows the value of non-action, teaching without words, performing without actions. That is the master's way. Fame or integrity, which is more important? Money or happiness, which is more valuable? Success or failure, which is more destructive? If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. True perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself. True fullness seems empty, yet it is fully present. True straightness seems crooked. True wisdom seems foolish. True art seems artless. The master allows things to happen. She shapes events as they come. She steps out of the way and lets the Tao speak for itself. When a country is in harmony with the Tao, the factories make trucks and tractors. When a country goes counter to the Tao, warheads are stockpiled outside the cities. There is no greater illusion than fear, no greater wrong than preparing to defend yourself, no greater misfortune than having an enemy. Whoever can see through all fear will always be safe. Without opening your door, you can open your heart to the world. Without looking out your window, you can see the essence of the Tao. The more you know, the less you understand. The master arrives without leaving, sees the light without looking, achieves without doing a thing. In pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things, until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering. The master has no mind of her own. She works with the mind of the people. She is good to people who are good. She is also good to people who aren't good. This is true goodness. She trusts people who are trustworthy. She also trusts people who aren't trustworthy. This is true trust. The master's mind is like space. People don't understand her. They look to her and wait. She treats them like her own children. The master gives himself up to whatever the moment brings. He knows that he's going to die, and there has nothing left to hold on to. No illusions in his mind, no resistances in his body. He doesn't think about his actions. They flow from the core of his being. He holds nothing back from life. Therefore, he is ready for death as a man is ready for sleep after a good day's work. Every being in the universe is an expression of the Tao. It springs into existence unconscious, perfect, free, takes on a physical body. Let circumstances complete it. That is why every being spontaneously honors the Tao. The Tao gives birth to all beings, nourishes them, maintains them, cares for them, comforts them, protects them, takes them back to itself, creating without possessing, acting without expecting, guiding without interfering. That is why love of the Tao is in the very nature of things. In the beginning was the Tao. All things issue from it. All things return to it. To find the origin, trace back the manifestations. When you recognize the children and find the mother, you will be free of sorrow. If you close your mind in judgments and traffic with desires, your heart will be troubled. If you keep your mind from judging and aren't led by the senses, your heart will find peace. Seeing into darkness is clarity. Knowing how to yield is strength. Use your own light and return to the source of light. This is called practicing eternity. The great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered within the Tao. When rich speculators prosper while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible while the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. It is not in keeping with the Tao. Whoever is planted in the Tao will not be rooted up. Whoever embraces the Tao will not slip away. Her name will be held in honor from generation to generation. Let the Tao be present in your life, and you will become genuine. Let it be present in your family, and your family will flourish. Let it be present in your country, and your country will be an example to all countries in the world. Let it be present in the universe, and the universe will sing. How do I know this is true? By looking inside myself. He who is in harmony with the Tao is like a newborn child. Its bones are soft, its muscles are weak, but its grip is powerful. It doesn't know about the union of male and female, yet its penis can stand erect. So intense is its vital power. It can scream its head off all day, yet it never becomes hoarse. So complete is its harmony. The Master's power is like this. He lets all things come and go effortlessly without desire. He never expects results. Thus he is never disappointed. He is never disappointed. Thus his spirit never grows old. Those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. Close your mouth, block off your senses, blunt your sharpness, untie your knots, soften your glare, settle your dust. This is the primal identity. Be like the Tao. It can't be approached or withdrawn from, benefited or harmed, honored or brought into disgrace. It gives itself up continually. That is why it endures. If you want to be a great leader, you must learn to follow the Tao. Stop trying to control. Let go of fixed plans and concepts, and the world will govern itself. The more prohibitions you have, the less virtuous people will be. The more weapons you have, the less secure people will be. The more subsidies you have, the less self-reliant people will be. Therefore, the Master says, I let go of the law, and people become honest. I let go of economics, and people become prosperous. I let go of religion, and people become serene. I let go of all desire for the common good, and the good becomes common as grass. If a country is governed with tolerance, the people are comfortable and honest. If a country is governed with repression, the people are depressed and crafty. When the will to power is in charge, the higher the ideals, the lower the results. Try to make people happy, and you lay the groundwork for misery. Try to make people moral, and you lay the groundwork for vice. Thus the Master is content to serve as an example and not to impose her will. She is pointed, but doesn't pierce. Straightforward, but supple. Radiant, but easy on the eyes. For governing a country well, there is nothing better than moderation. The mark of a moderate man is freedom from his own ideas. Tolerant like the sky, all-pervading like sunlight, firm like a mountain, supple like a tree in the wind. He has no destination in view and makes use of anything life happens to bring his way. Nothing is impossible for him. Because he has let go, he can care for the people's welfare as a mother cares for her child. Governing a large country is like frying a small fish. You spoil it with too much poking. Center your country in the Tao, and evil will have no power. Not that it isn't there, but you'll be able to step out of its way. Give evil nothing to oppose, and it will disappear by itself. When a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater the need for humility. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers. He thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts. If a nation is centered in the Tao, if it nourishes its own people and doesn't meddle in the affairs of others, it will be a light to all nations in the world. The Tao is the center of the universe, the good man's treasure, the bad man's refuge. Honors can be bought with fine words. Respect can be won with good deeds. But the Tao is beyond all value, and no one can achieve it. Thus, when a new leader is chosen, don't offer to help him with your wealth or your expertise. Offer instead to teach him about the Tao. Why did the ancient masters esteem the Tao? Because being one with the Tao, when you seek, you find. And when you make a mistake, you are forgiven. That is why everybody loves it. Act without doing. Work without effort. Think of the small as large and the few as many. Confront the difficult while it is still easy. Accomplish the great task by a series of small acts. The master never reaches for the great. Thus, she achieves greatness. When she runs into a difficulty, she stops and gives herself to it. She doesn't cling to her own comfort, thus problems are no problem for her. What is rooted is easy to nourish. What is recent is easy to correct. What is brittle is easy to break. What is small is easy to scatter. Prevent trouble before it arises. Put things in order before they exist. The giant pine tree grows from a tiny sprout. The journey of 1,000 miles starts from beneath your feet. Rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. Therefore, the master takes action by letting things take their course. He remains as calm at the end as at the beginning. He has nothing, thus has nothing to lose. What he desires is non-desire. What he learns is to unlearn. He simply reminds people of who they have always been. He cares about nothing but the Tao. Thus, he can care for all things. The ancient masters didn't try to educate the people, but kindly taught them to not know. When they think that they know the answers, people are difficult to guide. When they know that they don't know, people can find their own way. Their true words seem paradoxical. Failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. Therefore, the master fulfills her own obligations and corrects her own mistakes. She does what she needs to do and demands nothing of others. If a country is governed wisely, its inhabitants will be content. They enjoy the labor of their hands and don't waste time inventing labor-saving machines. Since they dearly love their homes, they aren't interested in travel. There may be a few wagons and boats, but these don't go anywhere. There may be an arsenal of weapons, but nobody ever uses them. People enjoy their food, take pleasure in being with their families, spend weekends working in their gardens, delight in the doings of the neighborhood. And even though the next country is so close that people can hear its roosters crowing and its dogs barking, they are content to die of old age without ever having gone to see it. True words aren't eloquent. Eloquent words aren't true. Wise men don't need to prove their point. Men who need to prove their point aren't wise. The master has no possessions. The more he does for others, the happier he is. The more he gives to others, the wealthier he is. The Tao nourishes by not forcing, by not dominating. The master leads. As our exploration of the Tao Te Ching draws to a close, let us pause and reflect on our journey through Lao Tse's divine landscape. The wisdom we've encountered within these pages transcends time and space, reminding us to embrace simplicity, cultivate humility, and journey with grace along life's path. As in water's softness there lies power, so too may we discover our own inner strength through gentle acceptance and surrender to the flow of life. Remember, my friends, the secret of the Tao lies not in seeking outside ourselves, but in turning inward, trusting our inherent nature, and allowing our true selves to shine in harmony with all that surrounds us. Buddhist philosophy speaks of the four invisibles: water to the fish, air to the bird, mind to mankind, and enlightenment to the ignorant. Because you see, you never know your own element. Now, it's impossible, therefore, to give a definition of consciousness, because we don't know anything outside it, just as the fish doesn't know anything outside water, and the bird doesn't know anything outside air. We don't know unconsciousness. We only know when we have been unconscious. And so we are in a very difficult fix to attempt to define the subject of this seminar. We all know what it is, and yet none of us know what it is. We know we're conscious. It's the same sort of problem as to try to say what color your eyes are. I don't mean whether they're blue or brown, but the color of the iris, the lens of the eye. Because we say it has no color, it's transparent, it's like pure glass. And yet, that might be a color to somebody who had a different kind of eye. An Englishman and a Hindu were once sitting in the backyard of the Hindu's home, and the Hindu was talking about the necessity of a background for the perception of any figure. So he said, against what background do you see those flowers? And he said, against the background of the hedge. And against what background do you see the hedge? He said, the background of the hills. And against what background do you see the hills? He said, the background of the sky. And he said, and against what background do you see the sky? And the Englishman fell silent. The Hindu said, it's the background of consciousness. But there you see we reach a limit. And you can talk until all is blue about whether consciousness and reality are the same thing, whether there really is ever any such thing as pure unconsciousness, whether consciousness is eternal, whether, as the subjective idealists would say in philosophy, there is primarily mind, and all so-called physical and material existence is something in mind or something in consciousness. You can debate that subject forever and ever and ever and come out nowhere. There is no answer to the question when asked in that way. But it is helpful as a start to make things at once more simple and perhaps a little more difficult by overcoming at the beginning the traditional opposition between the spiritual and the material, or the mental and the material. By the trick of talking about all things, whether spiritual or physical, in terms of pattern. Because that's all anybody can really talk about, pattern. You see, it's fundamental to our common sense, which was highly influenced by Aristotle in the book of Genesis, that all forms are composed of some substance, in roughly the same way as sculptures are made of stone. or pots made of clay. But a serious physicist no longer thinks in such terms about the material world. He doesn't think it's made of anything, because what the physical process of nature is patterns. You could say patterns of energy, but that's using the old ceramic language. Patterns aren't made of energy. The patterning is the same thing as the energy. So if you use the verb patterning as what the universe is, then you get something that you can talk about. You can describe patterns, you can measure them. You can say what a pattern is doing, although a pattern isn't a thing. A pattern is a verb, it is a process, it's an activity. So we can say patterning is what is going on. And consciousness is a kind of patterning, as we shall see. Just so are flowers and human beings and stars, and trees, water, air, everything, even space itself, is a form of patterning. And this means, in other words, that the universe is what physicists would call an energy field. And likewise, consciousness is a field. In the sense, say, that space is obviously a field. That is to say, an area in which things happen. That's the primary meaning of field. A field is a playing field, a field in which something happens, like an arena. Only when you use the word field more in the sense of physics, you mean a field of forces, like a magnetic field, like a gravitational field. And the curious thing about fields is that they exercise their energy in a non-mechanical way. For example, if gravity were non-field, that is to say, if it were the ordinary sort of exercise of energy, like the propagation of heat, or like someone pulling, then when you put something on the ground, you put a good heavy lead plate on the ground, that would be absorbing so much gravitational energy, and therefore anything you put on top of the plate would be less acted upon by gravity than the lead plate itself, and then anything on top of that would be still less, and you would reduce the energy of gravity by piling things up. But you don't. It doesn't make the slightest difference to the gravitational field. So in the same way, if you take an electrical coil, say surrounding a plastic tube, you can put a current through that, and you create a field within the tube. You can put your hand inside the tube, and nothing will happen to it. But the minute you put something that is like steel inside the tube, it will get hot. But no heat will be generated until the steel is inside the tube, because the coil plus the steel equals heat. But the coil has to polarize with the steel inside before anything happens at all. So that shows us that what is operating is a field. Now, think then of the world as a field characterized by patterning, for which another name is energy. And we are going to have to treat consciousness in rather the same way. Now, one thing that is characteristic of all energies, all energies whatsoever, all patterning whatsoever, is that we find it convenient to think about it in terms of the spectrum. So there is a spectrum of light, the visible spectrum running from red to violet, and beyond the visible spectrum there is a very big invisible spectrum, because our eyes respond only to a small section of the measurable spectrum of light. So we have infrared rays at one end and ultraviolet at the other, and then so on out to cosmic rays, gamma rays, hard X-rays, all sorts of things on the invisible bands of the spectrum. So in exactly the same way, there is a spectrum of sound. And if anybody was a sufficient scientist of cookery, they would devise a spectrum of taste. There are certainly spectra of other kinds of vibration than sound and light. And there are likewise conceivable spectra of shapes, spectra of emotions. So we could talk too of a spectrum of love, ranging at the red end from lust or the Freudian libido to divine love at the violet end, divine charity. And in the middle greens would be things like friendship and endearment, and so on. Each emotion, as a matter of fact, could be thought of as having its own spectrum. Now then, the curious thing about the world is that it's a kind of interlocking of spectra, of which the best analogy would be weaving. The interesting thing about weaving is that you've got the two groups of cross threads which give you the pattern, the warp and the woof. And if you pull out either one, there is no pattern, nor is there any cloth. It all falls apart. It needs both the warp and the woof for there to be any pattern at all. And they together constitute the cloth. Now let's look at a similar illustration in the ordinary everyday world of this interlocking of patterns. Let's take the photograph of a face in a newspaper. If you examine this photograph under a magnifying glass, or even with the naked eye, you will easily see that it isn't a continuous face, as faces are supposed to be, but it is a whole collection of dots. Some are heavy, some are light. And according to the heaviness and lightness, as you stand back, you get, as it were, the illusion of there being present, in terms of those dots, a human face. Now let me pose the question. What is the relationship between the form of the face and the gridwork of dots? At first sight, there doesn't seem to be any relationship between them at all, because the printer uses exactly the same kind of screen with which this process is done for any face whatsoever. So the kind of screen he uses makes no difference at all to whose face it is. Anybody's face can be on it, or any other shape. So you might say the fact that he is using a grid is completely irrelevant to the form of the face. Take still another illustration, the radio. When you turn on your radio and it comes on first thing in the morning, the announcer does not say, "The sounds you are now hearing are vibrations of the diaphragm activated by electromagnetism. This is mediated to you through a network of transistors and a broadcasting station with such and such frequencies." He just does not intrude the mechanics of radio. He comes right on saying, "This is station so-and-so, welcome, this is this morning's news," or whatever he begins with. So it would seem that the structure of the radio, the wiring, the transistors, the speaker, have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the message that's coming across it. They are in two different worlds altogether, so it would seem. Then take another possibility. What about the brain? Is thought, emotion, or consciousness itself a function of the brain? If we knew a great deal about the anatomy of the brain, would that tell us a great deal about the patterns of human thinking? Or would it tell us as little about the patterns of human thinking as knowledge of radio engineering tells you about the technique of Bach, whom you hear over the radio? See, there's a real puzzle. And this is one of the interesting subjects brought out in this extraordinary book called Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan. And I don't think he's clearly answered it, because he is trying to say that what is most important is not so much the message or what is supposed to be the content of any method of extending our nervous system, such as radio, such as television, such as printing, such as photography. He is trying to say that the message is the medium. That is to say, you are influenced by television, not so much by the advertising and all the goop that comes across on it, but by the fact of being in touch with the world through this particular electronic system with all its peculiarities. It's a very interesting idea, and he's put up an argument for it, but I'm not convinced that his argument is quite solid. But I want to go into this question, because obviously you would not hear any music except you had an orchestra in your room, were it not for your radio or your phonograph. And as a matter of fact, even if you had an orchestra in your room, you wouldn't get them to produce any music without those instruments. Now, let me ask the question in another way. What is the relationship between the piano and what you play on it? Any? You can play anything practically on a piano. And the structure of the piano doesn't make any difference. And yet without it, you couldn't play. So we've never seen anybody thinking without a brain. So what is the relationship between them? Well, again, you see, it's rather like warp and woof. The warp goes one way, and the woof goes the other. But by the interlocking of the two, you get something. So what you've got then are spectra of different kinds. See, when you dial, and you move the dial, what you're doing is you're changing the wavelength of your radio. That is to say, you are moving from one end of the spectrum of waves slowly to the other. So the spectrum of radio meshes with another spectrum which is being used in the production of music. As a matter of fact, the production of music is an interlocking of many spectra, but we won't go into that because the emotional spectra are involved. Spectra of speed, of dexterity, of harmonics, all kinds of things go into this. So you get the picture of the world as an enormous web, where spectra mesh with spectra of all kinds, and they're all mutually interdependent. And through them, it all hangs together. And the peculiar fact of these spectra is that they come into being together, almost. The world is not, you don't see things appearing in nature, except with certain insects and birds that actually practice weaving. But you don't see plants and trees being exactly woven. What seems to happen more than that is that warp and woof come into being together at the same time. In rather the same way that back and front necessarily come into being together at the same time. Or head and tail. You don't see a creature born as a head and then later developing a neck, a trunk, feet, and tail. It just doesn't work that way. It comes in together, head and tail. Even the spermatozoon has a head and a tail. So then, what I want to go into, of course, is the spectrum of consciousness and its many transformations. The different range, the huge range of this spectrum is extraordinarily fascinating. So then, but let me first be sure that we are quite clear about this physical conception of the world. You see, you can also call these spectra, if you want to, dimensions. And dimensions is a very useful idea. You can see that you can't have a physical existence in terms of point, line, surface. Each of those is a dimension. It's not till you get the so-called third dimension, although it should correctly be called the fourth, and time the fifth. It's not till you get the so-called third dimension that anything is physically manifested. Then you're there. Now you could say these dimensions are quite different from each other. The surface is a very different thing from a line, as is a line from a point. But somehow they all go with each other in a way that we don't normally think of as a kind of, in other words, dimensions don't seem to bear the same sort of relationship to each other as do opposites. At least not in our ordinary thinking. We think that opposites are mutually exclusive, and that you can't have something that is hot and cold at the same time. It's either hot or cold. But dimensions are not mutually exclusive. Dimensions are always dimensions of the same field or the same thing. And so then you have to think, therefore, of what we've hitherto called the mental and the physical, the spiritual and the material, as dimensions of the same thing. Dimensions of patterning, dimensions of energy. So then you've got this fantastic universe with all these interlocking spectra and dimensions. And this, of course, is the real harp that the angels play. When they talk about you going to heaven and playing the harp, what are you doing? You've got a spectrum of strings, see? And from that, when you play the harp, you don't play all the strings at once. But that'd be just chaos, like when you play the piano. Just don't take your elbows like this and slam the whole thing down. You select. So throughout nature, all these spectra that are interlocked are being selected from. That is why the eyes select only a narrow band of the spectrum of light, while the ears select a narrow band only of the spectrum of sound. And further than that, by the use of attention, we screen out all sorts of things we don't want to notice. Our senses are further selective, you see, influenced by thought. And so this is analogous to plucking the strings of a harp, where you make choices as to which strings you will pluck. So when the angels play their harp, the music is everything you see. So that's the real meaning of what you do in heaven when you go and play the harp. You become one with God when you create the universe, you see. That's the real meaning. Well now, what about the spectrum of consciousness? I'm going to designate, I couldn't avoid it. I tried to, but I couldn't. A sevenfold spectrum. That's number 7 is awkward. Every kind of phony occultist is hung up on 7, and I wanted to get away from that, but I just somehow couldn't manage it. So, let's take it like this. We're going to, you see, from one end, the most dull dimension of consciousness, or band of consciousness, and landing up at the other end of the brightest. So you begin with number 1, which is sleep. And of course there are 2 kinds of sleep. Dreamless and dreaming. And number 2 is torpor. As in a state of going to sleep or under the influence of alcohol, you feel no pain at all, or you're sort of anesthetized and your senses are dull and blurred, and you don't feel like being very active. 3, waking consciousness. Only I have to qualify this because the others are awake too. But I mean our normal, everyday consciousness, which we're going to call symbolic. And I'll explain why as we go through these in detail. Number 4. Sensory consciousness. Number 5, cellular. Number 6, molecular. And number 7, we'll just give the name light to it. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear that these names that I have used are not claiming to be exact scientific names. They are simply suggestive. We do not yet have a science of consciousness in the sense, the Western sense of science. It doesn't exist. And that's one of the things we shall eventually have to do. So these names are rather symbolic names than exactly scientific names, and you must keep that in mind. Now, it's rather interesting that this particular spectrum should best be drawn not on the usual way a spectrum is drawn, which is simply a band, but it should be drawn as a circle, of which each of these is, as it were, a cut in the pie.
Welcome to a moment of calmness from One A Day. That's right, a calming moment from a vitamin brand. Wait, don't zone out yet. One A Day multivitamins help provide nutritional support for your well-being as part of a healthy lifestyle. Whether you're navigating a busy day or seeking quiet reflection, One A Day vitamins are here for you. Choose clarity, choose wellness, choose One A Day multivitamins. Science that matters for nutritional support. Grab your One A Day vitamins at your favorite retailer today.
So that beyond here is again sleep. Deep sleep, dreamless sleep. Because you know the Hindus have a way of classifying the states of consciousness, which isn't quite the same as this. They start out with number 1, this one, the waking state. Then they take number 2, the dreaming state. Number 3, the dreamless state. And number 4, this one, which is called Turiya simply, which means the fourth, and which cannot be described. And they would say that when you go to bed at night, you sink first into the dreaming state, then you go down into what they call Sushupti, the dreamless state, and you may get back into the fourth, and that is why sleep refreshes you. Because you as an individual are withdrawn into the center of the universe, into the Atman, or the Brahman, the primordial reality, the ground of being, to use Tillich's phrase, which he got from Jakob Böhmer. And so that's why you are refreshed every night. That's how there you know who you are, really, deep in. Because, as the Hindus teach, everybody is really it. That is to say, the Godhead. Playing at being, dreaming at being, whoever is your particular personality. And then it's only at night, then, when you sleep, that you go back again to being the undivided one and only single essence of the universe. Only when you wake up, you forget about it. Why? Because in the primordial state, there's nothing to remember. There's no time. And you have to have time working for memory to work. So imagine then this thing as a circle where, say, at the top of the circle you have number 7. Brilliant. And then the colors of consciousness going right round and meeting again here, here and here. So you kind of have black and white next to each other at the top. If we put this in terms of color, then all the other colors connecting them all the way around. Because, of course, you see, black and white, as I will show you later on in the seminar, are astonishingly creative. You can do everything with black and white. Black and white really contain all color. And this is why the Chinese theory of the universe is based on the opposition of the yang and the yin, the positive and negative. The names yang and yin are derived respectively from the north and the south sides of a mountain. This is the primordial image. The yang is the south side of the mountain, which is bright. The yin is the north side of the mountain, which is in the shadow. Now, nobody ever saw a one-sided mountain. Can't be such a thing. So in the same way, you cannot have yang without yin. The symbol of the yang-yin, you know well, I don't even need to draw it. The two interlocked commas, one black, one white, and each with the opposite color as its eye, so that they look like two fishes chasing each other. This is a very profound symbol, because the idea which goes with it is this, that yang and yin are a wave process, where the yin aspect is the crest and the yang aspect is the trough. And likewise, in the same way as you can't have a one-sided hill, you can't have half a wave. Half a wave doesn't exist anywhere in nature. There are no half waves of light, no half waves of sound. There are always complete waves, or none. Because you cannot have the crest without the trough, and you can't have the trough without the crest. It just won't work. Now, however, there is a pulse in this. There is a point where the yang force reaches an ascendancy and then begins to drop into the yin, where the yin force reaches an ascendancy and begins to rise into the yang. And the Chinese are always thinking about this in relation to tendencies in natural and human affairs, where, for example, the yang force of a storm will reach a peak point where it must drop over into the yin force of calm, where the whole book of changes we call the Yi Jing is based on this. The Yi Jing is a marvelous play with yang and yin. You see, just let me say this about it in parenthesis. When you want to make a decision and you've got all the facts in, at least all the facts you could have got time to collect, because you could go on collecting facts about any decision forever, but the time comes when you have to make it. And you say, now I've got all the facts, and they really don't help me to decide, because I might go one way and I might go the other. Let's flip a coin. And everybody's always doing that. But you see, a coin only gives you two possibilities. Two answers. Either the thing answers yes or no. So the Chinese have a coin, as it were, to flip, which gives you 64 possibilities. And you take one of them. And it doesn't give you a yes or no answer. It gives you a kind of a thing like a Rorschach blot, really. It doesn't look like a Rorschach blot, but that's what it is. Into which you read your situation and make up your mind accordingly. And this is done, you see, by combining the yang and the yin in a complex pattern. The I Ching consists of hexagrams. And they are composed of two kinds of lines. An unbroken line, like this, is a yang or positive line. And a broken line, like this, is a yin or negative line. Then, there you've got them. Now, there are, if you take a figure with three lines, which we'll call a trigram, see? There are 8 ways of making such a trigram with yang and yin lines. This one happens to mean fire. No, water. No, fire, excuse me. Fire. 2 positive and 1 negative in the middle. Now, if you've got 8 trigrams, there's a possibility of making out of those 8 trigrams 64 hexagrams. So this one would be water, and you'd get one which was fire and water together. See? So to each of those, the Book of Changes attaches an oracular remark. And if you look up the book, when you've, by a certain process, got your hexagram, it gives you some light on your decision and the direction it should take by bringing it out of you by its remarks, in the same way as a Rorschach blot brings out your psychological disposition. So that's 64 ways of tossing a coin. If you had a 64-sided coin, you could do it that way. If you could make such a thing, you probably could. It'd be spherical. So, from yang and yin, from the extremes of polarity, because you see, light is as intensely alive as you can get. But if you go too far into light, it'll burn you up, and you will get darkness. But people don't know, they don't realize that the farthest you can get into darkness, it'll start getting bright. Because you can't have darkness without light any more than you can have light without darkness. So when we were babies, we were never told this. And it's a secret that light and dark go together. It is the only real secret there is. Black and white. But what we've forgotten the secret, because with black and white we're playing another game, which is called, black might win. See, that's what makes everything a thrill. If you knew you would always win in any situation, it would be just a pushover, and life would suddenly cease to have any interest whatsoever. You would be, imagine yourselves in total control of everything that happens. A kind of Jehovah type. You would be bored to death. Everything would do just what, no surprises, nothing. You see, when in a game, you're playing a game, and the outcome of the game becomes known. Supposing in course of bridge, the 4 players all suddenly realize together that one of them has all the cards that will take the tricks. What do? They don't play the game, they cancel it and begin again, shuffle the pack. When in chess, 2 pundits are sitting there meditating, one of them suddenly says, well, it's obvious, in 53 moves you're going to win. They cancel the game. So in the same way, an omniscient God who knew the whole future would cancel the universe and say, think up another. So it is fundamental to the game of black and white that it must seem that black will win and eat up white. That, in other words, non-existence will triumph over existence. Or rather, let me put it this way, non-being will triumph over being. Because the secret is that existence is being and non-being, oscillating. So that for every time you get being, you get non-being. Just as everything is vibration. And these spectra are vibrations. Light is vibration. If I sit next to a girl at the movies and I want to make flirtations with her, and I put my hand on her knee, and I leave it there, she'll cease to notice it. But if I gently pat her knee, she'll know I'm there all the time, because I go on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off. And that is energy, you see, that's something happening. And so everything is on-off. Only sometimes on-off happens so fast that you don't notice the off. For example, light is a pulsation, but all light seems to be constant. And so we don't notice the off because our retina is retaining the image of on while the off is happening in the light. So we don't notice the off, except if you get an arc light. You can notice a little flicker to it. And that's why they don't allow arc lights in sawmills. Because sometimes the flickering of the arc light can synchronize with the movement of the teeth on the saw in such a way that the saw seems to be still when it's actually moving, and people get very serious accidents that way. But everything is on-off. Now then, sometimes, you see, we don't notice the off, but at other times we don't notice the on. And that is when we're asleep, when, in other words, or when we're dead, when the trough, the off section, takes a long spin. Because you see, there are big vibrations and little vibrations. Some vibrations happen so fast that we can't measure them. Others happen so slowly that it takes a century. It may take 1,000,000 years for a single swoop of the curve that goes down or that makes the up crest of the wave. You see, when you look at the wave pattern, you must realize that the crest is measured from the top to the middle of each trough, and that the trough is measured from the top of each crest to the bottom of the trough. They overlap. So if you can argue it's all trough, you can argue it's all crest. It's a funny world. So the argument that it's all trough and that maybe just a little bit of crest, about boing, like that, boing. These are the people who say, well, we are flashes in an eternal darkness. It's the pessimistic point of view. And then there are the people who say there really is no death at all. Death is just an illusion that seems to happen. This is the optimistic point of view. And the optimistic point of view is essential to the pessimistic, as the pessimistic is essential to the optimistic. Because you wouldn't know who you were, you see, if you didn't have both points of view. I'm not going to see, and when I teach, I don't try to persuade anybody. And everybody's at liberty to disagree, because I wouldn't know what I was thinking unless there were people to disagree with me. So in the same way, supposing you're in a social scene, like here in La Jolla, there are nice people, and there are not so nice people. There are various kinds of nice people, various kinds of not so nice people. There are, for example, nice people who belong to the country club set. There are nice people who belong to the arty set. Nice people who belong to the social service set, and so on. And then there are nasty people who may variously be defined as the poor, the beatniks, the generally disrespectable people who live on the wrong side of the track or the wrong part of the hill or whatever it is, or the wrong town. And the nice people boost and maintain their collective ego by talking about how dreadful the nasty people are. And the nasty people boost their collective ego by talking about what frightful bourgeois squares the nice people are. But they don't, neither group realize that they have a symbiotic relationship, just like bees and flowers. Only, whereas the bee-flower relationship is harmonious, the symbiosis of differing social groups is disharmonious, because each group needs the other to know who it is. Because if you were the only kind of people there were, you wouldn't know who you were. See, in a totally conformist society, someone sitting next to you is just like you, so there's no point talking to him. Because you might just as well talk to yourself. In other words, really and truly, to be yourself, you need other. You don't know what you mean by self unless you know what you mean by other. So this is how yang and yin, the polarities, generate everything. And are absolutely essential to each other. Now, the funny thing is this. If you belong to a certain group of saved or elected people, and you know you're saved and elect because of the damned people outside, whether this is a social salvation, a spiritual salvation, or any kind of salvation you want to think of, financial salvation, whatever. When you realize that you only know who you are because of the, as it were, adversary or enemy or outgroup, you start laughing. Because that's very funny. It's the contrast from suddenly thinking, wow, those bastards outside, and suddenly realizing that they are enabling you to take this pose of coming on tough, which you think is great. And you start laughing. And this is why society, as we now know it, is afraid of this ever getting let out. This is really subversive. This is terrible subversive stuff. I mean, all that Marxist is just the same thing as us, backwards. It's the collectivist idea of the state as opposed to the individualist idea of the state. But the individualists become collectivists through huge corporations. Lenin said he would love to see these great corporations growing up because it would be just so much easier for the state to take over. They've already provided the organization. So you see, there is a tendency within our economy to become a collectivist economy, just by progressing with its own whatever it's doing, with its so-called free enterprise. And there will be naturally, therefore, be a tendency in a collective economy to fall apart because it all gets so boring, and start everybody out on his own initiative again. This thing goes round and round. But the important thing is that, supposing you believe in a free enterprise economy, you must have, in order to maintain your solidarity, especially in a very great country, you must have an external enemy. And if there wasn't one, you'd have to invent one. Because that keeps everybody on their toes. It keeps us from slacking on the job, and they say, you've got to beat those fellows. And they're terrible. So we've got to be very serious about that, see? And of course, you lose your sense of humor. When you get so serious, you don't really know underneath that it's a game. Then you become a bircher on one extreme or a communist on the other. So you have to keep, if you want to be a sane human being, you have to know right in the back of your head, right back here, what the Germans call a Hintergedanke, which is way in the back of your mind. You have to see the point that enemies need each other. Cops and robbers. Where would the cops be for a job if there weren't any robbers? How would you know you were law-abiding if there weren't criminals? It's tricky, but it's very dangerous teaching. Very subversive, because you might think, I would say, if I realized that, well, I said, it simply doesn't matter what kind of a person I am. And do anything I want, because evil is necessary to good. There's no fun in that attitude. Because that simply says, I won't play. All right, if you want to sit by yourself under a tree and not play, I guess you could do that, provided you don't interfere with our game. And if you come and interfere with our game and say, well, now look here, you people, you're all wrong, because you think you ought to be good, but it doesn't matter whether you're good or not. See, you mustn't do that. Don't interfere with the game. In order to have this kind of knowledge, that's why all this kind of knowledge has always been esoteric. And in any esoteric school, people were tested first before they got in order to find out whether you were civilized. In other words, you can't give powerful tools and powerful knowledge to people who aren't civilized and who have no humor and who have no graciousness. That's why it's difficult when young people get hold of knowledge for which they're not emotionally prepared. And they are given full and total instruction on birth control when they're 4 years old. It means nothing at all.
or it may mean something positively dangerous. But nowadays, there's no way of concealing these things. I said it's a secret, but in the world of science, there are no secrets. So I don't feel any compunction about talking about these things, because if I don't, somebody else is going to. Because an awful lot of people know about it. But that is the inside dope, if I may say so. That these extremes need each other and can't manifest without each other. And the point is how to keep your head when you know that. So let's have an intermission. Well, now, this morning, I was dealing mainly with two key ideas, one of which was the physical universe as a system of intermeshing spectra, depending on each other and playing with each other in the same way as warp and woof in weaving. And I underline the notion that these spectra are different dimensions rather than components of the physical world. And that although I'm using the word physical here, I'm using it in the sense of its original meaning natural, rather than the later meaning that has been attached to it, that is to say, material world. The world envisaged by analogy with ceramics. The material world considered as a world made out of stuff. You see, as we all know, stuff is supposed to be something inert and stupid, which can't do anything. And therefore, in order that stuff may be found in intelligent shapes, it has to be informed by an external energy, an external intelligence, so as to be brought into shape. And this is the idea of the world based upon the analogy between creation and carpentry, or creation and ceramics, or creation and sculpture. Just in parentheses, good ceramists and sculptors don't treat their medium as if it was stupid. They know that the potter, who's a good potter, knows that there is life in clay, and that he has to respond to that life in order to do the work of pottery properly. But those who are not themselves artists don't know this, and therefore the public has been bamboozled for centuries on the notion that patterns have to be composed of some sort of basic stuff. Now I was trying to substitute for that sort of conception of the world the idea of interweaving spectra which are different dimensions of energy or of patterning. And I used advisedly the verb patterning as distinct from the noun pattern, because when you use nouns in combination with verbs, you obscure language. Watch out for this. This underlies many people's misunderstanding of things, is the differentiation of noun and verb. It's an entirely unnecessary differentiation. And it gives one the impression that wherever there is an action going on, that is to say, something appropriately described by a verb, there must be some other kind of thing than an action, which is described by a noun, and to this is ascribed the origin of the action. So when you say, there is thinking, because the verb has to have a subject, which is a noun, someone says, well, who is thinking? Obviously, there can't be any thinking without a thinker, without a who thinks. And that is a question, a problem that arises simply because it is a convention of our grammar that every verb has to have a subject which must always be a noun. So a noun stands for a thing, and a verb stands for an event. And we therefore suppose that events are caused by things. But if you ask a person what he means by a thing, he will never be able to tell you. He will give you a series of synonyms, such as object, fact, whatever. But all these are simply alternate words for thing. Then what do you mean by an event? You say process, etc. And it's equally vague. You can always describe events in terms of things, and equally, you can describe things in terms of events. If I want to say, ordinary, while the cat sat on the mat, the dog went for a walk around the house. That's noun-verb language. But I can equally say, while the catting sat on the matting, the dogging went walking around the dwelling. And I've changed the whole sentence into verbs, and it's still as clear as it was in the beginning. Or I can turn it all into nouns. The cat, seat upon the mat, the dog upon a walk around the house. It's all nouns. But in a noun world, of course, you'll have a static world. In a verb world, you'll have a dynamic world. But there aren't, for example, if you take the word fist, is a fist a noun? Yes. But it describes a process. It's not properly a noun, because this noun suddenly vanishes. This thing, fist called fist, disappears the minute I open my hand. What happened to it? See, I stopped fisting, and I went into handing. So the verb language has a little edge over the noun language as being better suited to the kind of process that nature is. So, when you realize that you can discuss the whole of nature in the verb language, you don't have to ask the question, who started it? You don't, in other words, have to seek for a noun as the explanation of the verbs. You don't have to seek for something that is not process to start process off. So, this then is the language I'm using when I talk about patterning as the basic goings-on of the physical world, and patterning can be described and measured and so on and so forth. So then, the other point that I was making particularly was in the spectrum, you have the extremes of the spectrum. The sound and the silence, the light and the dark, space and solid. And I was showing how by the yin-yang philosophy of the Chinese, how these extremes are not opposites but poles. They go together. They require each other. You know one in terms of the other. And so in this way, you don't have the world as an opposition of light and darkness, of being and non-being, in such a way that one of the poles could exist alone, either being or non-being, non-being or being. Because the whole nature of poles is that without both of them, there are neither. And so if we have a polar universe, then you don't have, as it were, have to worry, as if this was something to worry about, that the play, the music of existence might cease forever and ever and ever. In that kind of cosmology argument that's now going on, you know, there are two dominant theories of cosmology among physicists. One is the steady state theory, and the other is the explosion theory. The steady state people want to make out that hydrogen, free hydrogen in space, is all the time, as it were, coagulating and forming itself into new bodies. Whereas the explosion theory people, who have the edge of the argument at the moment, say there was originally an enormous concentration of energy which blew up and expelled all the galaxies from it, which went floating out, and the whole thing is gradually dissipating itself radioactively until it will reach a state of quiescence. And of course, if you have a Judeo-Christian mind which thinks of time in a linear way instead of a circular way, you'll think that's awful, because the whole thing is running down, and when it's finished, that'll be it. But you see, I always want to ask the question, well, what was it like before the Big Bang went off in the beginning? Probably pretty much the same state of affairs as when it all petered out in the end. In other words, whatever happened once can always happen again, given enough time or given enough something or other. I'll settle for either the steady state theory or the Big Bang theory. It doesn't make much difference, except by way of describing the pattern, how it happens. The question of whether it happens, I always figure that whatever did happen could happen again. You know, I like to think about myself. Well, I'm a kind of a funny phenomenon that this universe is doing. And it's done me this time. It may do me again later on, maybe a million years from now. It'll do me again, not quite the same way, but rather like me, near enough to be me. You know, like you play the piano, and you play a certain piece, and then you stop, and the piece is dead. Then you think, well, let's play it again. And you play the same piece again. It's the same piece, but it's a different playing. Play the tape recorder. So I've got the tape on here. I can play it. Then it stops. Then several days later, we can put it on and play it again. It's a little different probably, but same process. And every time the universe plays any one of you, each one of you it plays is I. See, everybody calls himself I. And you feel like you're I just as much as I feel I'm I. That is to say that you're the middle, the sensitive center, out of which everything looks. And you call yourself I, well, that's my name. And everyone is I. The only trouble about being I is that you can only be one at a time. See, when a child asks, who would I have been if my father had been someone else? Not me. These are rather funny questions children ask. Well, you had to be someone in order to be anyone. But every someone is I. And it's all, as it were, the same I, looking out through different eyes. You put an electric light inside a black sphere and make holes in the sphere, and all the holes are different, but the light at the bottom of it's the same. Something like that. That's a kind of a rough analogy. But anyone knows from a physical point of view that every organism is simply a pattern of behavior which can't be separated from the pattern of behavior which we call its environment. It's all one pattern, except the one pattern, like every one pattern. Give me a pattern, and every pattern, look at these bamboos. There's a pattern. And every pattern has wiggles in it, and sub-wiggles, and sub-sub-wiggles. See, the main wiggle is the stem. Then the twig come out as a sub-wiggle. The leaf comes out as a sub-sub-wiggle. And if you look into the leaf, there are sub-sub-sub-wiggles. And that's the way it goes. They all belong to the pattern. It's difficult, too, to say who's wiggling what. Is the stem wiggling the leaves, or are the leaves wiggling the stem? Both arguments are equally valid. The universe is doing me, and I'm doing the universe, because the universe depends on my optic nerves and all that structure to turn the sun into light. Wouldn't be light if there weren't any eyes. It's like a hand on a drum. If there's no skin on the drum, there'll be no noise. It takes two to make love, to make an argument, to do anything. That's the yang and the yin. Well, now, let's go through this spectrum, or begin to go through it. I'm not going to go all the way through it this afternoon. We begin at the end of sleep, torpor, and we'll go as far as number 3. You know that sleep is a very mysterious subject. Scientific students of sleep are not yet at all sure what sleep is. Apparently people need it, but nobody really knows why they need it from a strictly scientific point of view. And we apparently need to dream in sleep also. People who are deprived of dreams get very, very restless and unhappy. But we're not quite sure why we need dreaming. I mean, we've got all sorts of theories, the Freudians and the Jungians and so on. They think they know why we need to dream. But it hasn't been really rigorously established scientifically why we do, or why we need to sleep. But from a naive point of view, you can say, of course I need to sleep. Because after I've had a whole day of business and friends and work and so on, it's too much. There's too much input. I want to digest it. And while I'm digesting it, I don't want any more input. I don't want any more information. So I want to be turned off. That's, one of those simple common sense things that everybody knows, but has not yet been fully explained. So sleep is this marvelous thing that we have, which is a forgettery process that is apparently essential to our psychic health every 12 hours or so. And if you don't get it, you start getting worried. As a matter of fact, insomnia is a thing that is rather curious. Because if you do get insomnia, the worst thing of all to do is to worry about it. Invariably, if I can't sleep, I don't try to go to sleep, I get up and work. Or do something. Or I read a very difficult book, especially one that is big and weighs a lot. This is a good way to go to sleep. But if you have insomnia, don't ever try to go to sleep. Nobody can try to go to sleep. Lots of mothers think they can get their children, and they say, darling, try to go to sleep. Didn't your mother say to you, try to go to sleep? But she wanted to get you out of the way. That was the only reason she said, try to go to sleep. Or she thought perhaps it was good for you, and that you ought really to get your sleep. It's like telling some child that it's got to eat its spinach. And the child can start chewing and chewing and chewing on meat or spinach, which tastes of nothing, and it chews it into an absolute hard, stiff pulp, and there's just nothing to be done with it except spit it out. And, they've already extracted by their teeth instead of their stomach all the vital juices from the thing, and all that remains is roughage. And you say to children, you must go to the bathroom after breakfast. Every day, regularly. You must be regular. Otherwise, you're constipated, and that's bad. This is a form of the double bind. You are required to do that which will be good only if it's done voluntarily. So try to go to sleep. It is impossible. Sleep has to happen because it's a spontaneous activity, and it can be helped as we shall see when we come to consider torpor. But by and large, sleep is a spontaneous activity and is a way of turning yourself off to get away from the bombardment of awareness and forget, because forgetting renews. And that also is a function of all demolitions, of deaths, of destruction of patterns, of knocking down buildings, of the whole change process in the universe. Because we want to do what we've done before over again, only if you remember it too often, it'll become boring. So if you forget, then you can do it again, and it'll be just as amazing as it was the first time. And so there absolutely has to be a forgettery built into this universe in just the same way and for just the same reasons that there must be an eliminative process in the body as well as an eating process. And both are vitally important. And you see, we have very different attitudes to the two. Eating is something we do socially. Eliminating is something we do privately. Eating we consider, we want the all good smells and all that kind of thing. Eliminating is all bad smells and that kind of thing. Well, this is largely social conditioning that tells us this. But nevertheless, these are the two sides of the game we play, and there's a spectrum between the two. So in the same way here, you have to forget, just as you have to eliminate, so that everything is renewed, because it can happen again without being boring. Things that happen all the time, in any way, begin to pass out of consciousness. For example, if there is a constant noise going on while we're talking, it will annoy us at first, but after a while we shall cease to notice it, if it's constant. But if it keeps varying and coming on in different volumes and different rhythms, it'll hold our attention all the time. So anything that just goes diggity-ding, 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 you eventually cease to notice. So then, sleep is the renewer, because it's a state of forgetfulness. I'm not going to go in this seminar into the whole problem of dreams. That would lead us very far afield. Now, torpor describes something approaching sleep. But this also is a valuable state because it's very comfortable. One can, in sleep, you're not aware of sleeping. But in torpor, you are aware of the comfort of tiredness and minified consciousness. It is a sort of pseudo return to the womb. And so when after a hard day's work, where people have been irritating and combative, you go home or you go to the local bar and you down a number of martinis, they turn you off and they put you into a state of near torpor, or what is quite correctly and scientifically called, by this learned and funny word, narcosis. Narcosis, Narcissus, is connected with narcosis. It means torpor, reduced consciousness, reduced sensory input. And the reason why Narcissus is associated with narcosis is that Narcissus, when he saw his reflection in the water, didn't know it was himself. And he became so fascinated by this image in the water that he became unaware of everything else. He got hung up, or shall we say, to use current slang, hooked on his own image. And he didn't know it was his own image. That was the only reason he could get hooked on it. So Narcissus and narcosis are associated. And so the permissive narcotic in our culture is alcohol. And other narcotics like opiates exist. But you must remember that you can only correctly use the word narcotic or something inducing the state of consciousness which is torpor. Now you can do it by massage, by relaxation exercises, by hot tubs, many, many ways of inducing torpor. You're not in torpor, you're not truly relaxed, because you tend to lose muscular tonus, which you always retain in true relaxation. But you begin to go like a limp rag. Now there's a place for that in life. And it's good as a way of sleep induction for people who have insomnia and are so anxious that they don't allow themselves to be turned off. I would want to say in general a good word for sleep and torpor, because a lot of people are against them. Uspensky, who was Gurdjieff's sort of St. Paul, and as much as a misinterpreter in a way too, always felt that his life was a war against sleep, that intense light consciousness should conquer darkness. Now that's a stupid idea. To be a human being, you have to love the light, but you also must trust yourself to the darkness. Be able to let yourself go in the faith that you'll arrive back all in one piece. I have a friend who calls her name is Charlotte Selver, and she does a kind of work for which there is no name. She calls it sensory awareness. And one of her experiments is to get a person to lie on the ground. And simply she says to them, now, it's all right, the ground is going to hold you up. So just lie down, and there's nothing else you need to do, because the ground is firm and it will hold you there. Then she examines the person's body after a while and says, look, do you know what you're doing? You're trying to hold yourself together, as if your skin weren't strong enough to contain you. And you're doing this all the time to keep yourself from falling apart. Why? You think, do you, that if you don't hold yourself together, you're just going to go blah and disappear into some kind of frightful green jello? No, you won't. In the same way, a lot of people, it's why we wear such ridiculous clothes, especially women. Men are pretty bad, but women, the men do it around the neck. You know, that necktie is a symbol of slavery. It's a noose to strangle you with. But you feel tight. They're really held in here, and held in by the belt, and women wear girdles that hold them in like this, and in the coat that fits your body, jacket, you know, you put it on, and it fits, and you're squeezed, or you get these tight pants that hug you, and you know you're there. Other people, of course, don't know they're there till they're sitting on spikes. Then they really know they're there. And a lot of people make trouble for themselves in order to be able to sit on spikes, so that they know they're there. Now, supposing instead you switch to another kind of clothes, you wear Japanese clothes. I often wear Japanese clothes because they happen to be, for men, the most comfortable form of clothing ever devised. There's only one place where it holds you, and that's at the belt. But you wear the belt not round your waist, but below your belly. And you wear it rather loose. Otherwise, the garments are flowing. They don't interfere with the nature of the cloth, because the cloth is woven on a rectilinear pattern. See, cloth is straight like this. So when you get a Japanese kimono, it folds up instantly for packing. But you try to pack a Western man's jacket or a woman's suit jacket, and there's absolutely no way of folding the thing at all. So it always comes out of your suitcase needing to go to the pressing. But you take a kimono and you put it on, and it falls exactly according to its own nature around you, and they're very dignified. And you feel, but you don't feel closed in. Now that makes some people terribly uncomfortable. If they don't feel pinched And pulled together, they don't feel dressed and feel this is I'm going around with a bathrobe. And a lot of people can't wear a bathrobe beyond a certain hour of the day because they don't feel that they're respectable. I mean, you could perfectly well get up and put yourself into the most beautiful, any kind of gorgeous bathrobe you want to, and run around and do your work if you don't have to go to the office. Even if you had to go to the office, they ought to allow you to wear interesting robes. And furthermore, I once asked the Japanese why he didn't wear a kimono anymore. And he said, you can't run for a bus in a kimono. Well, it's perfectly true. Unless you hoist it up and tie it into the belt, you can't. And that's rather undignified. But the thing is that in this age that is now forthcoming, when we're going to cut down the working hours because of automation, people have got to learn to saunter and dawdle. Otherwise, they'll get into mischief. And so forms of clothing which are supremely comfortable, which require a kind of a sauntering attitude to life, are going to be very important for the future of civilization. This pitch for the kimono. Now, but this is all to do with letting yourself go into the earth, into the darkness, as it were, and trusting the world that lies below you as much as you might trust the world that lies above you. Drop. Fall freely in space. That's a marvelous sensation. It's like floating. That's why people do skydiving. Because just until they pull that parachute, they have the sensation of flying. Even though they're dropping very fast, they get the sensation. Total freedom. Whee! See? That's what everybody's looking for. So we get that in a way in sleep. The arms of Morpheus. And the idea of sleep as healing. Some psychiatrists are very keen on the idea of putting their patients by hypnosis and other methods into long, long periods of sleep where they feel completely secure and looked after, nothing to worry about. I have a favorite sleeping place. It's a house on top of the hills in Hollywood. There's a great eucalyptus tree, and underneath this there is a deck. And I like to get a sleeping bag and lie on my back underneath this eucalyptus tree and look up at the stars through the shadows of the leaves and just go. See, it is a marvelous feeling. Well, now we come now to the things of sleep, where I will say this one thing about dreaming and about torpor. We know the motto, in vino veritas. In wine, the truth comes out. Of course, it also has a subtle double-take meaning. All popular sayings have many levels of meaning. And it's a Christian saying, in vino veritas, belongs to the Western culture. It also means in the wine is the true blood of Christ, the Catholic Mass. And that refers to the fact that life requires death, the drinking of blood. But in the sense of in vino veritas, the person reveals himself, lets go of himself, lets his unconscious come out when he is drunk, or also in sleep when the dreams come up and show the inner side of things. You will see in that way that these two states can in a certain sense be creative. They let things come up which are normally put down. Because number 3 spectrum, the waking state of what we will call symbolic consciousness, is highly guarded. It is the most guarded of all these states. Now then, I want you to understand then that the ordinary state of consciousness, what you call normal consciousness, is by no means a frank, objective awareness of the real world. Not by any means at all. It is a state of highly cultivated, hothouse-reared, special ways of perceiving the world, in accordance with symbolic formulae. And it all depends on your orientation to the physical world as to what you see in it. You know the story of the tailor who went to see the Pope? They asked him, what was he like? He said he was at 41. Or a woman who says to a man, you saw Mrs. So-and-so today? Yeah. What was she wearing? She had no idea. You didn't notice, but you saw. But you didn't pay attention because you weren't interested in what she had on, but what she had off. Or whatever it be. So, we notice according to what we are programmed or conditioned to notice by our social conditioning, that is to say, our upbringing, our education, our professional needs, our survival needs. So do we notice what's happening. Now, supposing somebody from an entirely different planet came into this room and started looking at us, and he wasn't programmed to notice the things that we notice, he would ask the most amazing questions about what we're doing. He had noticed that most of us have standard ways of holding our hands. Why do some of you sit like this? Why do some of you sit like this? Why do some of you sit like this? Why don't you do this? Wouldn't that be the obvious thing to do with your hands? Just let them hang. Very few people ever do that. Because they feel, a funny feeling they get, that they got a couple of wet fish down here. They don't know what to do with it. See? And then he noticed all sorts of funny things about us that we would never occur to us to think about. And he would notice, for example, you might say, well, what color is a human face? You know, the comic strip artists tell you. Pink. Or brown. They do a black outline, and then they color the whole face pink. Now, for a change, take a real good look at a face. And you'll start seeing that it just doesn't have a particular color. Not only does it depend where the face is in relation to the available light and what it's reflecting, but also it's a patchwork of all kinds of subtle color changes. And it's full of funny hairs and spots and all sorts of things, which we're not supposed to see, especially on ladies. You know, men don't care so much if they have a hair somewhere, but girls carefully pluck hairs out with tweezers and make them disappear so as to get as smooth a texture as possible. The Japanese go so far as for a beauty to cover herself completely with a white paste so that she's got complete pancake makeup, dead white. And when a Japanese photographer takes a picture of you, you'll never recognize yourself because he works out every wrinkle, every shadow, and presents you as a complete mask. Because it's inauspicious to have shadows. When a Westerner first painted one of the emperors with the shadows showing, they said, but you can't paint the emperor that way. His face is not dirty. And besides, it's inauspicious to have a shadow fall on the imperial visage. So you can see shadows. The artist Rembrandt taught you to see shadows. Leonardo taught you to see shadows. But modern painters have discovered that shadows aren't darkness. Shadows are light. Shadows are color. Shadows are full of vitality. So you begin to get vivid purple shadows. People say, well, but you don't go around with a purple shadow on you, do you? What do you mean? Do you? You think that a shadow is brown because you haven't ever looked at a shadow. And you don't realize that shadows are absolutely vibrant with light. We'll go more into that later when we come to this number 7. But there it is, you see, the world that we see or think we see is actually not the world at all, but is a selection of things that are in the world, a selection governed by certain symbolic processes. What a man ought to look like, what a woman ought to look like. And we try ourselves to dress and to behave in such a way as we live up to the symbolic requirements that are expected of us. So then, we think there's a certain kind of work that is worthy of being done. And you ought to be tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, doctor, lawyer, merchant, chief, or whatever it is. And you ought to fit into one of these roles. Of course, there are innumerable things one might do. Infinite. But we like to get classified. We want to know whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. Whether you belong to the left wing or to the right wing. Whether you are a Christian, a Jew, Baptist, Methodist, whether you're a Mohammedan or what you are, just so long as we can get you put into a compartment. That is to say, into a symbolic classification. Now, what is the reason for that? Well, this kind of consciousness here is based on a very peculiar specialization of the human brain, which we call, in everyday life, conscious attention. That is the capacity to focus or concentrate awareness upon what we call any one thing at a time. It's as if, in other words, conscious attention were a spotlight, and that the rest of awareness were a floodlight. In other words, every nerve end in your body is receiving input all the time, is in that sense energized, is aware of everything that comes to into its periphery. So you are taking in the totality of your surroundings. But conscious attention is flipping from point to point to point to point to point like this, and is making sense out of what it sees by adding it up with memory. It's an immense advantage from some points of view to be able to have this faculty, because it does the same sort of thing for the human organism that radar does for a ship. That is to say, the function of radar is to scan the surroundings of the ship and watch out for unexpected changes in the environment. And radar is a scanning process. In other words, it is a beam that goes out and bounces against things and feeds back the bounce to the screen. So in exactly the same way, consciousness or conscious attention is always scanning the environment and watching out for new eventualities that might be threatening or that might present favorable opportunities for some sort of advancement. Now, conscious attention has to be programmed as to what to attend to, what is important to look out for. So that we say to baby, now when we're teaching it language, watch out for the cars on the street. Watch out for that dog. Watch out for this, watch out for that. This is programming the baby's radar. But we, as a human community, have put so much importance and so much psychic investment into our radar that we believe ourselves to be that. We identify the self with the radar and not with the rest. So that we get this sort of a situation. When I say I say I do this, I walk, I talk, I think, I run, I hit. But other things, such as the beating of the heart, the breathing of the lungs, the functioning of the glands, the constellation of the shapes of the bones are all defined not as anything I do, but as something that happens to me. Just in the same way, when it rains, it happens to me. I don't rain. But I do walk. And so, in other words, what has happened here is that we have identified ourselves with the point of origination of conscious attention and with the point of voluntary control. That's me. Anything else happens to me. So in this way, we have disowned most of ourselves. It's not me. The body you have is merely a vehicle that you go around in like an automobile. So if I would say to some young woman, gee, you're beautiful, she might well reply, if she were highly influenced by our culture, oh, you're so like a man. All you think about is bodies. I may be beautiful, but I got my body from my parents. And I want to be admired for myself and not for my chassis. See, she's a poor little chauffeur. That's how she defines herself. She disowned herself. She disowned her body and said, it was given to me by my parents. I'm not responsible for it. Or a child in rage can say to his parents, I never asked to be born. It was you who brought me into this world. And that child doesn't know that when the father was going after the mama and there was just an evil gleam in his eye, that evil gleam in your father's eye was you. Just as it was you, that was the little spermatozoa that made it. It was you that was that fetus.
Unless the plans include you.
Just as if your heart is you, all that was you too.
No, not unless the plans include you.
But you see, this waking consciousness, symbolic consciousness, ignores that altogether. Because it sets limits, and rather arbitrary limits, to what you are. You are just that voluntary center. You are that beam of consciousness that sweeps over the environment and sees things in series, one after another. Especially if you use a language which uses an alphabet. Alphabets spell everything out one after another.